Welcome back to Two Reviews. I'm Jason, and today we have the Shozy NEO BGs, where detail comes at a cost. Right, disclaimer before we start the review, this unit was acquired by Brian secondhand from a person. We are not affiliated to any store or any brand, and this review is completely of my own opinion. They look quite nice. Right, TLDR before we start the review, the Shozy NEO BGs are quite neutral with a mid-bass boost and suppressed upper mids, but with immense detail. Okay, so now for a more detailed description of the sound, we'll be going through bass first. Bass here, sub bass is there. It doesn't really slam hard, it rolls off quite early, I would say. You just can't really feel the bass, no, sub bass in these. But mid bass, on the other hand, has quite an emphasis. It punches quite hard, especially for, well, a 5B AIEM. It doesn't have a dynamic driver, but it punches quite hard. The only problem is the bass in this Shozy Neos, for me, it's a bit too fast actually. Sure, it has its own benefits in the sense that you will be able to listen to fast music and these just won't fall behind that easily, but it, for a lack of a better word, it lacks naturalness, I would say. I want the bass to just stay a little bit longer and maybe actually have a little bit less mid bass. I think the mid bass on these they feel quite big for me. Okay, now we just go to the mid range. The mid range here is, I think this is the part where it conflicts me the most. So because of the mid bass boost that the Shozys have, the male vocals have this nice body to them, but the further you go into the mid range, instruments feel like they have this lack of weight in the notes, and it sounds it sounds oddly thin. I can't really describe this perfectly, but guitar plucks and such, I think it might be because of how fast these are. They they kind of lack the sustain that I want in the notes of the music, and they just plucks in general, they don't have much weight in them. They just sound thin overall, but they are indeed quite detailed. This is probably which is conflicting me the most. So it kind of depends on which you prioritize here, detail or tonality. You may or may not like the mid-range. I just don't really like the mid-range. They just sound too off, especially the upper mids. So the upper mids in the Shozys, I noticed, are very suppressed, and this is coming from a guy who is quite sensitive in the upper mid-range. So female vocals and such, they sound almost, they sound muffled, I suppose. I can't really think of a better terminology for it right now. Yeah, I think muffled, I think, is the best description for it. So female vocals sound, yeah, they sound muffled. Definitely. Violins and such also sound muffled. There is an advantage to this in the fact that that means that the violins and female vocals will just, they will never really hurt your ears. There's no apparent sibilance in the Neos, but it just sounds off. So if you're a big female vocal fan, and I don't really suggest these, unless if you listen to maybe some old time rock and roll or something, this might come in handy. But I in general don't like these. They're just way too suppressed in the upper mid range. Right, so now we just go into treble. Okay, now the treble is quite smooth, but there's this odd ringing, not ringing, I think. There's this odd peak at 6K, which kind of sometimes just shows up. It kind of depends on the music that you're listening to. I noticed this usually with bad recorded, like old time rock and roll and stuff. I don't think it's going to be a big offender, and the treble itself is quite detailed, actually very detailed. So you can probably see a theme here. Overall, the Neos are just very detailed, but the treble does roll off quite fast. So I think these roll off around in the 10k region, and then it just keeps going down. It doesn't have the best extension in terms of treble also. And yeah, it doesn't really have this, doesn't have much air in the sound because of this. So yeah, that's I think that's it for sound. So I think we'll just go into build quality and packaging. So first of all, I think that you'll notice is the shells. So the shells here, I believe they are full filled resin, and they have these nice gold flakes in them. I think these look very cool, very fancy. Maybe a bit too much bling. This is too much bling for me. And I think the all of the patterns between all the units are different. So yours might not look exactly like mine do. And yeah, second of all, the cable here, which is the second thing you'll notice, it's extremely thick. I mean, it's thick. But it's still quite pliable. But I don't really like these. I like the way they look, but I don't like the way they feel. They're not they're not the most microphonic cables I've ever used, but you can definitely feel the weight of this cable just dangling around your neck. And the chin slider doesn't really work sometimes. Occasionally, for me, it just starts to slide down if I move a bit too much. And yeah, overall, if you just sit down a lot and you don't mind bigger cables, I think these look exceptionally nice. Although I'm not the biggest fan of carbon at all. I think carbon, at least on IEMs, make them look cheap, especially on cables. On IEMs I can forgive it. On cables they just make the cables look cheap. I'm not a fan of that. But that's just my personal preference. I think overall the cable is quite pliable and nice. And by the way, speaking of the cable, the Neos supposedly have two versions. So the more recent versions are this version where they are using a 2-pin connector. The earlier version seems to be using an MMCX connector. Though I haven't confirmed this personally, and I don't know when they did this switch. So you might just want to check which kind of cable you'll be getting and which kind of termination uh, that your unit will have. Oh, I forgot to mention this. The shell is, well, it's a fully sealed shell. It's a 5BA setup. There's no fan whatever. So isolation is quite good. Isolation leakage, very minimal. And one thing to note though on the Shozy Neos, while we're on the shells also, the nozzle is a very odd shape. I don't know which engineer at Shozy just decided that, oh, the normal just flat or just some sort of indented nozzle with a normal diameter was wrong and they just had to reinvent the wheel. This nozzle just looks off. It doesn't look like anything I've ever seen. And the problem with such a nozzle is that it means that you, again, trying to find ear tips that are perfect for this nozzle is very hard. So I just pulled out the most generic sized ear tips that I could find that usually fits on really most IEMs, the SpinFit CP100s, because of how flexible they are, and I think they are quite a normal size nozzle, no, diameter, nozzle size wise, and they just simply don't fit on the Neos. They fit, but they will just come off very easily. They come off with bare force, barely any force at all. So that's why the Shozy ear tips have this. They have this sort of odd design in them. They have this sort of notch in them, and that goes for all the ear tips that come with this IEM. Which in total you'll be getting 9 pairs of ear tips, all sorts of sizes and shapes. So you'll have this normal flat, odd looking ear tip, but just actually they feel quite nice, but they're just oddly shaped. For my ears they work fine, but probably not for lots of other people, especially if you have a small, I think, not a smaller, if you have a bigger ear canal, these might not work for you. But it has lots of varieties here. I haven't tried I haven't tried all of them because this particular pair just worked for me. But yeah, just just something you would want to look around for in terms of the Neos. I think Het 5 probably has a thread on which Eartips work well with the Neos, but I couldn't really find anything in my Eartip collection that worked quite well as the Eartips that came stock on the Shozy. See, the stock Eartips don't fall off easily. I need quite a bit of force to pull them off. Right, so speaking of packaging, so I can't really show you what all packaging is there or what is included in the Shozys. Far as I know, it's just a normal white box with some documentation and this case, which is quite big actually. It's quite huge. It's like, I would say, almost a third of a 60% size keyboard. So it's about 10-ish centimeters wide, long, and about 6-7 centimeters wide, I suppose. Yeah. They do come with a lot of foam ear tips though, but the foam ear tips don't stay compressed for long. So yeah, might want to look for better foam ear tips probably. These feel like the ones that you get with KZ or something. So anyway, to just give you a comparison, I think in this price range you can compare these with the Moondrop Blessing 2s. I think the Moondrop Blessing 2s are a way better purchase. Moondrop Blessing 2s are a hybrid IEM from, well, Moondrop, and they're tuned differently, definitely. The Moondrops are Harman target, so there's more of an emphasis in the upper mid-range compared to the Shozys. I think the Blessing 2s sound a lot nicer. In terms of detail, I think they can be compared, but I feel like the Blessing 2 edges out the Neos just a bit. And overall tonality, I just think the Blessing 2s are just better. Straight out better. No question. And that's coming from a guy who is not really a fan of the Harman target. But overall, the Blessing 2s just sound better. So then, Jason, then what? Who should pick up the Shozys? I would say if you're looking for a neutral EM with suppressed upper mids, for whatever reason, if your music preferences just fit in that category, then yeah, you can get the Shozys. And if you like the looks of the Shozys, that could also be a selling point. But as per usual, I would suggest that if you can get these, try them out first, and just, yeah, I can't recommend these. I'm simply not a big fan of these. But I must admit, the data retrieval on the Shozys surprised me, and I think they will surprise you too. And yeah, because they shove the detail into your ears. They definitely do. But yeah, I just don't really see a reason to pick these up with the Blessing 2s being in the market now. But yeah, try them out for yourself if you have any doubts, which I would, as always, highly suggest before doing any purchase. But I think that concludes my review. I'll show what Brian thinks. Like, I think the link should show up right about now. And yeah, like if you liked it, comment what you think, subscribe if you want more content like this. And yeah, I'll see you next time.